Welcome back to Echoes in the Dark, where stories aren't just told, they linger. This one is not fiction. It's a scar echoing from a broken heart. The rain hadn't stopped since morning. Ethan sat alone on a cold metal bench at Harbor Point Terminal, a quiet ferry dock surrounded by restless waves and thick gray skies. His jacket did little to stop the chill, but it wasn't the cold that made him tremble. It was the weight pressing down on his chest. He stared at the floor, motionless, while her voice echoed in his mind. "You never change, Ethan." Just 6 words, but they cut deeper than anything he'd ever heard. Lila's face, the way she looked at him before she left, still haunted him. It wasn't just pain in her eyes, it was fear. And he had put it there. Once he thought this city was his fresh start. A place far from his broken childhood. Abandoned by a father. Ignored by a mother and half-raised by a bitter grandmother. But then Lila walked into his life like light through a cracked window. He believed love could fix what was broken inside him. But that night proved otherwise. One moment of anger, one uncontrolled reaction, and her face twisted in horror. His hand still burned from the memory, and his heart hadn't stopped bleeding since. Now she was gone. Maybe forever. The terminal emptied around him, but the silence never came. He heard crying, soft, distant, almost like a whisper. He turned. Nothing. But the sound was inside him. Was it her? Or was it his own soul? Finally breaking? He shut his eyes, but the darkness behind them was worse. The guilt wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was becoming something else. Something that didn't want to stay hidden. The night crawled in slowly, wrapping Harbor Point Terminal in a fog that seemed to mute the world. Ethan hadn't moved. His fingers were numb, but he didn't care. All that remained was the storm inside him, and it was louder than the sea. His thoughts raced, each one darker than the last. What if she hated him now? What if she wanted nothing more than to forget he ever existed? No, that thought hurt too much. He pulled out his phone again. No messages, no calls. Lila's number was still there, just a name on the screen. He hovered his thumb over it, trembling. He'd already tried earlier, of course. She didn't answer. Not that he expected her to. He knew what he had done, and part of him whispered that he deserved this silence. But there was another part, buried deeper, one that wasn't ready to let go. That part still remembered the way she used to hold him during his worst nights. The way she'd say, "You're not broken, just hurting." And now he had hurt her. A heavy clanking noise broke the stillness. Ethan looked up. Just a cargo worker dragging a trolley, disappearing into the fog. But then, another sound. A whisper. Closer this time. He stood up quickly, eyes scanning the empty terminal. The lights above flickered, humming faintly. He was alone, or at least he should have been. But the whisper came again. This time it said his name. "Ethan!" He froze. It wasn't just a whisper. It was her voice.
Leela?
No, it couldn't be. He spun around. Nothing but shadows. The ferry dock was quiet again. Maybe it was just his mind. Maybe the guilt had finally started breaking reality apart. He tried to shake it off. He rubbed his eyes, breathed deep, sat down again. But the whisper remained, now echoing just beneath his thoughts. She was still with him, but not in the way he wanted. The clock above the ticket counter ticked louder than it should have. Or maybe it was just in Ethan's head. Time moved differently now, slower, heavier. He stood up and walked toward the edge of the dock. The sea below was pitch black. Waves lapped gently against the concrete, but there was no comfort in the sound. It felt like the ocean was whispering too. "Ethan?" There it was again. He turned, heart racing. Still nothing. The fog had grown thicker, swallowing the far end of the terminal. Shapes seemed to shift in the mist, like silhouettes watching him, waiting. He told himself it was just exhaustion, trauma, a guilty mind playing tricks. But deep down, something else stirred. Lila was pregnant. That truth crushed him more than anything. He didn't just lose her. He lost a future. A family he could have finally had. Something he never got to experience. Growing up. And now, he might have destroyed that too. His chest tightened. He struggled to breathe. He wanted to scream. But the voice returned before he could. "You weren't supposed to hurt me." This time it wasn't just a voice. It was inside his ears. His bones. It was behind him. He turned sharply. No one. But the air had changed. He could feel it, like someone had just walked past him, or through him. He stumbled back toward the bench, his vision blurred, heart pounding like a war drum. Then he noticed his phone screen lit up. No notification, no message, just Lila's name, and beneath it, a text appeared, slowly, letter by letter. "You can't run from what you did." He dropped the phone. It clattered against the concrete, but didn't break. Unlike him, he stared at it in disbelief. That number had been disconnected. He was sure of it. Ethan didn't pick up the phone. He couldn't. His hands were trembling, and his legs gave way beneath him as he sat back down on the cold floor. The glow of the screen dimmed, but the message burned into his mind. "You can't run from what you did." There was no signal, no service, no data. Still, the message had come through. He looked around the empty terminal. The fog outside had swallowed the pier whole. Even the faint light from the lampposts had vanished. The world felt disconnected, like he'd slipped into a crack between realities. Then he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing across the concrete. Someone or something was walking toward him. He stood quickly, heart hammering, scanning the mist. The footsteps stopped. "Lila," he whispered, hoping for an answer he wouldn't regret. Nothing. Just silence. Until, "Why did you do it?" The voice came from everywhere. From inside him. From above. From beneath the floor. Ethan backed away, breath ragged. "I'm sorry," he shouted into the dark. "I didn't mean to." But there was no one to hear him. Or maybe someone did. His phone lit up again. Not a message this time, just the camera, suddenly active, facing him. But the screen didn't show his reflection. It showed her. Layla. She was staring directly at him, eyes hollow. Tears streamed down her face, but they were black like ink. And she whispered, "You broke me." Ethan threw the phone. It hit the wall and shattered, sparks flashing as it died. He backed against the terminal wall, gasping, shivering, not from the cold, but from something deeper. He had come here to escape. But whatever followed him wasn't just guilt. It was her, or what was left of her. Ethan sat curled in the corner of the terminal, staring at the broken phone. The screen flickered once, then went black for good. His breath came in shallow bursts. His shirt clung to his skin, soaked in cold sweat. Every sound in the building now felt amplified. The hum of the vending machine, the buzz of dying fluorescent lights, even the creaking of the floor beneath him. But worse than the sounds were the pauses between them, silence sharp enough to cut. In that silence, he heard it again. Drip, drip. He turned his head slowly. Behind the bench, a dark puddle had started to form, thick, viscous, not water. It was bleeding. The floor. The terminal. His mind. He stumbled toward it, hands shaking, and touched the edge of the puddle. Red, cold, too real. He jerked his hand back, his fingers, now smeared with something that smelled like iron and memory. Then came the lullaby. Soft, out of place. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." It echoed down the corridor behind the ticket counter. A child's voice, off-key, broken, like an old cassette looping endlessly. Ethan's knees gave way again. He crawled toward the bench where he had last seen the phone, now dark and lifeless. "Stop it, please," he begged into the emptiness. But the song continued, and with each line he remembered. Lila's hand on her belly. The way she smiled when she first told him. The tears in her eyes when he screamed that he wasn't ready. And the moment after, his hands, her fear, her silence. The lullaby slowed, warped. "Mama's gonna buy you." A gravestone. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound that bounced off the empty walls and came, back sounding like someone else's voice. He was losing himself. Or maybe what followed him into this place was taking over. Ethan woke up on the floor. At least he thought he woke up. But nothing felt real anymore. The terminal was empty, silent, too clean. No blood, no fog, no broken phone. The puddle was gone. The whispering had stopped. Even the cold had vanished. He stood unsteady, glancing around. The sun was rising through the tall glass windows, casting warm light across the floor. For a moment, he almost believed he imagined everything. Then he heard it, knocking, but not from a door. From inside the ticket counter, 3 knocks, then silence. He stepped forward, legs heavy, breath shallow. Each footstep echoed too loudly, like he was walking inside a dream made of glass. He reached the counter, hand trembling, and looked over it. There was a crib. A small wooden crib. Old. Rocking slowly on its own. Inside, a bundle of cloth. Ethan stepped closer, drawn like a moth to fire. The crib creaked as it rocked, and just as he reached for the cloth, a sharp cry pierced the silence. A baby's cry. He jumped back, but the crib was empty now. The cloth unraveled by itself, revealing not a baby, but his shattered phone. Lit up again. One new message. He picked it up. It read, "You can still fix it, but only if you sacrifice what broke you." Then another message came through. "Come home, Ethan." He stared at it, confused. Where was home? He had no one, no family, no place that wanted him, except her. He looked toward the glass doors. Outside, the fog had returned, thick, waiting like a curtain hiding something else. He walked toward it. As he stepped outside, the cold hit him like a memory. Familiar, heavy, and from the mist came a figure. Layla, or what was left of her. She held her belly, tears on her cheeks, black as ink. Her eyes locked onto his. "You're too late," she whispered. "But maybe you can follow us." The last thing Ethan saw before the world went black was her turning away and the sound of a child crying from deep inside the fog. He took one step forward and vanished.